r/ProRevenge my childhood BFF became my teacher and destroyed me in class. The first thing I noticed when I walked into AP English wasn't the motivational posters or the perfectly organized bookshelves. It was the laugh. That same bubbling giggle that used to echo through my basement when we build pillow forts and plan our futures together. The laugh that disappeared from my life 3 years ago along with birthday invitations, lunch table conversations, and any hope I had of middle school not being a complete social wasteland. "Welcome to Advanced Placement English Literature," the voice said, and I felt my stomach drop to my shoes. "I'm Ms. Rodriguez, and I'm excited to challenge you all this year." Ms. Rodriguez. Not Sophia. Not Soph. Not the girl who knew I still slept with my stuffed elephant at 13 or that I'd never had my first kiss or that my mom cried every night after dad left. I tried to shrink into my desk chair, praying she wouldn't notice me in the sea of eager junior faces. But her eyes swept across the room with practiced teacher efficiency, and when they landed on mine, I saw the exact moment of recognition. Her welcoming smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else would have missed it, before snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves," she announced, her gaze lingering on me a beat too long. "Tell us your name and one thing you're passionate about." My palms started sweating. This was exactly the kind of thing that would have sent me into a panic spiral in middle school, back when she knew every one of my triggers. Back when she actually cared about them. One by one, my classmates shared their passions. Soccer. Photography. Marine biology. Normal things that normal teenagers could say without their voices cracking. When it was my turn, I mumbled something about writing and immediately looked down at my desk, hoping to disappear. "That's wonderful, Marcus," Ms. Rodriguez, Sophia, said warmly. "Writing is such a personal art form. I'm sure you have so many interesting stories to tell." The way she emphasized personal and stories made my skin crawl. Because she was right. I did have stories. Stories she knew better than anyone because she'd been there for most of them. The time I got sick at Jake Morrison's pool party in 6th grade. The panic attack I had during the school presentation about family traditions because mine was falling apart. The way I used to practice conversations in the mirror because I was terrified of saying the wrong thing. All stories that, in the wrong hands, could destroy what little social standing I'd managed to rebuild in high school. This semester, we'll be exploring themes of betrayal, loyalty, and the complexity of human relationships through various literary works, she continued, and I swear she was looking directly at me. We'll also be writing personal narratives about formative experiences that shaped who you are today. My mouth went dry. Around me, other students nodded enthusiastically, probably thinking about college applications and impressive essays. They had no idea they were sitting in a classroom with someone who held a loaded gun of my most humiliating moments, someone who'd already proven she had no problem pulling the trigger when it suited her. The bell rang, and students started filing out, chattering about their other classes. I shoved my notebook into my backpack, desperate to escape, but her voice stopped me cold. "Marcus? Could you stay behind for just a moment?" My classmates streamed past me toward the door, and suddenly the room felt impossibly small. Just me, her, and 3 years of unfinished business. I stood frozen by my desk while the last student disappeared into the hallway, their footsteps fading until it was just me and the ghost of my former best friend in the suddenly suffocating classroom. The motivational posters seemed to mock me now, reach for the stars, and every day is a fresh start. While Sophia shuffled papers at her desk with deliberate casualness. "You can sit down, you know," she said without looking up, her teacher voice artificially bright. I don't bite. But I remembered when she did. Metaphorically, anyway. The way she'd torn into Jessica Chen at lunch one day for wearing the same shirt as her, or how she'd systematically turned our entire friend group against quiet Emma Walsh over some imagined slight. Back then, I told myself it was just middle school drama. Now I wondered if I'd been seeing glimpses of who she really was. I reluctantly sank into the front row desk, my backpack clutched against my chest like armor. "What did you want to talk about?" Sophia finally looked up, and for a split second, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion flicker across her face. Regret? Guilt? But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "I just wanted to acknowledge that this might be awkward," she said carefully. Our history. Our history. Like we were former business partners instead of kids who'd sworn to be best friends forever. Kids who'd carved our initials into the old oak tree behind my house and promised we'd be each other's maid of honor someday. "I'm sure we can both be professional about this," she continued, and the word professional felt like a slap. "You're here to learn, I'm here to teach. That's all." I nodded quickly, wanting nothing more than to escape. "Yeah. Totally. No problem." "Good." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I do want you to know that I won't give you any special treatment. Fair is fair. You'll be held to the same standards as everyone else." There was something in the way she said it that made warning bells go off in my head. Not special treatment, I hadn't expected any. But the emphasis she put on fair sounded almost threatening. "I understand," I managed. "Wonderful." She turned back to her papers, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, and Marcus. I really meant what I said about those personal narratives. Some of the most powerful writing comes from our most vulnerable moments. Don't you think?" My blood turned to ice water. She knew exactly what she was doing, dangling the thread of my most embarrassing memories like a sword over my head. The desperate phone calls I'd made to her house after she'd started ignoring me. The way I'd followed her around school like a lost puppy, begging to know what I'd done wrong. The time I'd actually cried in front of Derek Martinez when he'd asked why my girlfriend didn't want to hang out with me anymore. "I should get to my next class," I said, standing so abruptly that the desk chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Of course. See you tomorrow, Marcus." I practically ran from the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the hallway, students laughed and chatted by their lockers, completely oblivious to the fact that my carefully reconstructed world had just been blown apart. Because now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just awkward, it was strategic. Sophia had me trapped in her classroom for an entire semester, with the power to assign grades, choose essay topics, and decide how much of my humiliating past she wanted to excavate. And something told me she was just getting started. The next morning, I seriously considered faking sick. I'd already crafted the perfect text to my mom about stomach flu symptoms when I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. Pale, dark circles under my eyes, shoulders hunched in defeat. I looked exactly like the scared middle schooler Sophia had left behind, and that realization made me angry enough to drag myself to school. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of making me run away again. But walking into AP English felt like entering a gladiatorial arena. Sophia stood at the front of the classroom, looking perfectly composed in a navy blazer and professional smile. She'd always been good at masks, I should have remembered that. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're ready to dive into our first unit on personal narrative. Her eyes swept across the room and landed on me with laser precision. Today we're going to do a little writing exercise to get those creative juices flowing. My stomach clenched. Around me, my classmates pulled out notebooks and pens, looking eager. They had no idea what was coming. I want you to write about a time when someone you trusted disappointed you, Sophia announced, walking slowly between the rows of desks. Really dig deep. What did that betrayal feel like? How did it change you? Several students groaned good-naturedly about the heavy topic, but I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't a coincidence. This was surgical precision. She'd found the one topic guaranteed to destroy me in 15 minutes or less. Don't overthink it, she continued, her voice sickeningly sweet. Just write from the heart. Sometimes our most painful experiences make for the most authentic stories. She paused beside my desk, and I swear I could feel heat radiating from her presence. Remember, vulnerability is strength in writing. Don't be afraid to expose those raw emotions. My hand trembled as I picked up my pen. Around me, keyboards started clicking and pens started scratching as my classmates dove into their assignments. But my paper remained blank, my mind racing with everything I couldn't write. How do you compose an essay about betrayal when the person who betrayed you is standing 3 feet away, grading your work? I glanced up and found Sophia watching me, her head tilted in that familiar way that used to mean she was concerned about me. Now it felt like a predator studying wounded prey. Having trouble getting started, Marcus? She asked, loud enough that several nearby students looked over. I'm fine, I mumbled, forcing myself to write something, anything, just to get her to move on. But she didn't move on. Instead, she crouched down beside my desk, lowering her voice to what probably sounded like helpful teacher concern to everyone else. You know, she whispered, sometimes writing about our own experiences can be therapeutic. Like that time in 7th grade when you opened up about your family situation. Remember how much better you felt afterward? My pen stopped moving. She was referring to the night I'd told her about my parents' divorce, about finding my dad's affair emails, about how I'd started having panic attacks because I was terrified my whole world was falling apart. It had been one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, shared with someone I'd trusted completely. Now she was weaponizing it. I'm sure you have lots of material to work with, she continued, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. The key is choosing which story will be most impactful for your audience. The threat was crystal clear. Behave, or she'd make sure my classmates learned exactly how pathetic and broken I'd been in middle school. Maybe she'd assign peer reviews where students would read each other's work aloud. Maybe she'd use my writing as examples in future classes. She stood up and moved on to help another student, leaving me staring at my mostly blank paper with shaking hands. This was only day 2, and she'd already made it clear, she held all the cards, and she wasn't afraid to play them. The weeks that followed blurred together into a nightmare of calculated humiliation. Sophia, Ms. Rodriguez, had turned psychological warfare into an art form, and I was her unwilling canvas. It started with the random, cold calls that somehow always landed on me during the most triggering discussions. When we studied the kite runner and talked about guilt and redemption, her eyes would find mine across the room. Marcus, you've been quiet today. Can you share a time when you felt responsible for someone else's pain? 28 pairs of eyes would swivel toward me while my throat closed up, remembering how I blamed myself for months after she'd abandoned me. Had I been too needy? Too boring? Too broken by my parents' divorce? I can't think of anything specific, I'd stammer. Really? That's surprising. Most people our age have experienced some form of regret about their relationships. The word relationships dripped with meaning that only I could decode. Take your time. I'm sure something will come to you. The silence would stretch until someone else mercifully jumped in with an answer, but the damage was always done. I could feel my classmates' curious glances, the way they'd started whispering when I walked by. Marcus, the kid who couldn't even answer simple questions without looking like he was about to throw up. Then came the partner assignments. For our next project, you'll be working in pairs to analyze the theme of betrayal in Julius Caesar, she announced one Tuesday morning. I've taken the liberty of choosing partners based on complementary strengths. My stomach dropped. I watched helplessly as she rattled off names, pairing the confident kids together, the smart ones, the popular ones. I already knew what was coming before she said it. Marcus, you'll be working with Bethany. Bethany Chen, Jessica's younger sister, and by extension, someone who'd witnessed my social exile firsthand. She'd been in our friend group peripherally, always watching with those sharp, calculating eyes. If anyone would remember the messy details of my friendship with Sophia, it would be her. Bethany turned to look at me with undisguised annoyance. She was one of those effortlessly cool sophomores who'd somehow tested into AP English, the kind of person who probably saw this partnership as academic suicide. Great, she muttered under her breath. After class, we awkwardly arranged to meet at the library during lunch. I spent the morning dreading it, knowing that working closely with someone from that time would be like picking at a barely healed wound. So, Bethany said when we sat down with our copies of the play, this is weird, right? What do you mean? She gave me a look like I was being deliberately dense. You and Ms. Rodriguez. Everyone's talking about it. My blood turned cold. Talking about what? Come on. You think people don't notice how she calls on you constantly? Or how you look like you're going to pass out every time she does? Bethany leaned back in her chair, studying me. Plus, my sister told me you guys used to be like, obsessed with each other in middle school. Before you had that huge falling out. We were just friends. The words came out strangled. Right. Friends. She smirked. Look, I don't really care about your drama, but this project is 20% of our grade. So whatever weird history you two have, don't let it tank my GPA. The worst part was that she was right. My grades were already slipping. Every essay came back with comments that seemed designed to cut deeper than academic criticism. Asterisk, your analysis lacks emotional depth, try drawing from personal experience. Asterisk, this argument feels surface level. What are you really trying to say? Asterisk, I know you're capable of more vulnerable writing than this. Asterisk. Vulnerable. That word haunted me. In Sophia's hands, it had become a weapon disguised as encouragement. That afternoon, I sat in my car after school, staring at my phone. I drafted and deleted a dozen texts to my mom, trying to figure out how to explain why I needed to transfer out of AP English without sounding completely insane. Asterisk, hey mom, remember my old best friend who destroyed my social life? Well, she's my teacher now and she's psychologically torturing me using her intimate knowledge of my childhood trauma, asterisk. Yeah, that would go over well. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, asterisk, hope you're working hard on that Julius Caesar project. Remember, betrayal is such a complex theme. Looking forward to seeing what insights you bring to it. Ms. R. Asterisk. She got my phone number. Somehow, she got my personal phone number and was texting me like we were old friends catching up. I stared at the message until the words blurred together, and I realized with dawning horror that this was only the beginning. The Julius Caesar project became my personal hell. Bethany and I met every day that week, and each session felt like a slow-motion car crash. She had no filter and apparently infinite knowledge about my middle school humiliation, thanks to her sister Jessica's front-row seat to my social destruction. So for the betrayal analysis, Bethany said, flipping through her notes, I was thinking we could focus on how Brutus justified stabbing his best friend. You know, the whole, I had to destroy you to save Rome thing. She paused, giving me a meaningful look. Bet you have some thoughts on that dynamic. I tried to focus on the text, but the parallels were impossible to ignore. Sophia hadn't wielded a literal knife, but the damage had been just as devastating. And now, just like Brutus, she probably told herself she had good reasons. Maybe we should look at Antony's response instead, I suggested weakly. Nah, the betrayal angle is way more interesting. Plus, Ms. Rodriguez specifically said she wanted us to explore the psychology behind it. Bethany leaned forward conspiratorially. Speaking of which, what's her deal? Like, why is she so obsessed with calling on you? Because she knows exactly which buttons to push, I thought. Because she remembers that I used to stutter when I got nervous, that I'd rather die than be the center of attention, that public speaking makes me break out in stress sweats. I don't know, I lied. But Bethany wasn't buying it. Come on. Jessica told me you guys were practically joined at the hip until 8th grade. Then suddenly you were eating lunch alone and she was queen bee of the popular table. What happened? The memory hit me like a physical blow. That last day before everything changed, we'd been planning our Halloween costumes, talking about high school, making promises about staying friends forever. Then Monday came, and it was like I'd ceased to exist. No explanation, no fight, no closure. Just, nothing. I honestly don't know, I repeated, and this time it was true. I'd never understood what I'd done wrong. Weird, Bethany mused. Jessica always said Sophia just outgrew you. Said you were too clingy or whatever. She shrugged like this wasn't devastating information. Anyway, back to Brutus. I think we should include some stuff about how betrayal damages both people, not just the victim. I nodded numbly, wondering if Sophia ever thought about the collateral damage. If she knew that I'd spent freshman year rebuilding myself from scratch, learning how to talk to people again, how to trust that friendships could last longer than a few months. My phone buzzed. Another text from Ms. R. Asterisk, remember, your presentation is Monday. I'm excited to hear your insights on betrayal and friendship. I have a feeling you'll bring a unique perspective to the discussion. Asterisk. Is that her? Bethany peered at my phone screen. Dude, that's so weird. Teachers don't usually text students directly. She was right. Every other teacher used the official school communication app. But Sophia was texting my personal number like she had some special privilege, some intimate connection that gave her access to my private space. You should report her, Bethany said matter-of-factly. For what? She's just being enthusiastic about the assignment. She's being creepy. And everyone can see how miserable you are in her class. Bethany studied my face. You know what? Forget Julius Caesar for a second. What did she actually do to you back then? Because this feels personal. The library suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Other students were scattered at nearby tables, but I felt completely exposed, like everyone could hear us discussing my pathetic history. It doesn't matter what happened before, I said. She's my teacher now. I just need to get through the semester. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. Sophia wasn't going to let me just get through anything. She was building towards something, each calculated humiliation another brick in whatever wall she was constructing around me. And I was running out of ways to escape. The presentation was scheduled for first period Monday morning. I'd barely slept all weekend, rehearsing what Bethany and I would say about betrayal and Julius Caesar while trying not to think about the cruel irony of the topic. I arrived early, hoping to grab a back corner seat, but Sophia had rearranged the classroom. The desks formed a circle now, with her chair positioned strategically to observe every student's face during presentations. Good morning, Marcus, she said brightly as I hesitated in the doorway. Perfect timing. I wanted to chat with you before class starts. My stomach lurched. About what? Your presentation, of course. She gestured for me to approach her desk, her smile never wavering. I've been looking forward to it all weekend. Bethany's such a strong student, I'm curious to see how you two collaborated. There was something predatory in the way she said collaborated, like she knew exactly how uncomfortable Bethany had made me with her probing questions about our past. We worked well together, I said carefully. I'm sure you did. Though I have to say, I'm particularly interested in your analysis of Brutus's motivations. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. You always were good at understanding complex emotional dynamics, even as a kid. Even as a kid. The casual reference to our shared history made my skin crawl. She was doing it deliberately, blurring the lines between past and present, teacher and former friend. Other students started filtering in, and I escaped to my seat just as Bethany arrived with a stack of note cards and a confident expression that made me feel even more unprepared. You ready for this? She whispered. No, I wasn't ready. Not for presenting in front of Sophia, not for discussing betrayal while she watched my every reaction, not for whatever trap she'd set that I couldn't see yet. Marcus and Bethany, Sophia announced once everyone was seated, why don't you go first? I think your topic will set a great foundation for today's discussion. Of course we were going first. Maximum exposure, maximum opportunity for humiliation. Bethany stood confidently and launched into our introduction, explaining how we'd chosen to focus on the psychological complexity of Brutus's decision to betray Caesar. I tried to follow along with my prepared notes, but Sophia's intense stare was making my hands shake. Marcus will now discuss the emotional impact of betrayal on both parties, Bethany said, gesturing for me to take over. I stood on unsteady legs, my throat already tightening. So when we look at Brutus and Caesar's relationship, we see how betrayal doesn't just hurt the victim. Speak up, please, Sophia interrupted smoothly. We want everyone to hear your insights. My voice cracked as I tried to project louder. Several classmates exchanged glances, the kid who couldn't even handle a simple presentation. Brutus convinces himself he's doing the right thing, but Shakespeare shows us that the betrayer suffers too. He's haunted by guilt, by the memory of what they used to have. Interesting, Sophia interjected. Can you elaborate on that guilt? What do you think it feels like to destroy a relationship with someone who trusted you completely? The question hit like a physical blow. She wasn't asking about Brutus anymore, she was asking about us, about what she'd done to me, forcing me to psychoanalyze my own trauma in front of the entire class. I think. My prepared notes might as well have been written in another language. The guilt would be, it would make you wonder if you had other choices. But sometimes people convince themselves they didn't have choices, Sophia pressed, leaning forward in her chair. Sometimes they tell themselves the other person was too dependent, too needy. That ending the relationship was actually kindness. What do you think about that psychological defense mechanism? The room spun slightly. She was describing exactly what had happened between us, laying out her justification like evidence in a trial where I was both defendant and witness. That's. I swallowed hard, tasting copper. That's probably just making excuses. How interesting that you see it that way. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Continue with your analysis. But I couldn't continue. The words had abandoned me completely, leaving me standing there in front of 28 pairs of eyes while my former best friend dissected our relationship under the guise of literary discussion. Bethany jumped in to save the presentation, but the damage was done. I'd cracked in front of everyone, and Sophia had orchestrated the whole thing with surgical precision. As I slumped back into my seat, one thought crystallized with terrifying clarity: she wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was trying to break me completely. The worst part about being systematically destroyed by someone who used to know you better than anyone else is that you start questioning your own reality. By Thursday of that week, I couldn't tell if Sophia's behavior was actually as calculated as it seemed or if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the way she'd restructured our seating chart to put me directly in her line of sight was coincidence. Maybe her essay prompts about childhood friendships that shaped us and learning to trust again after betrayal were just standard curriculum. But then she assigned our midterm project. You'll each be writing a personal memoir piece, she announced, pacing in front of the whiteboard where she'd written vulnerability equals authenticity in bright red marker. I want you to dig deep into a formative experience from your past. Something that changed the trajectory of your life. My classmates started murmuring excitedly about college application essays and meaningful topics. I felt like I was watching my execution being planned. The twist, Sophia continued, her eyes finding mine across the room, is that you'll be sharing these with the class. Reading them aloud. I want you to practice the kind of brave, honest storytelling that will serve you well in college and beyond. Reading them aloud. Of course. Because having to write about my trauma wasn't enough, she wanted to watch me perform it for an audience. Now, I know some of you might feel hesitant about sharing personal stories, she said, and I swear her gaze lingered on me longer than anyone else. But growth happens outside our comfort zones. I'll be here to support you through the process. Support. The word made me want to laugh or scream or both. After class, I tried to bolt for the door, but her voice stopped me cold. Marcus? A word? I reluctantly approached her desk, where she was shuffling through papers with deliberate casualness. I wanted to check in about your presentation earlier this week, she said without looking up. You seemed overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Like I'd been caught in a surprise rainstorm instead of deliberately triggered by someone who knew exactly which wounds to press. I'm fine, I managed. Are you? Now she looked at me directly, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine concern. Because I've noticed you seem anxious in class. Withdrawn. That's not the Marcus I remember. The Marcus she remembered. There it was again, that casual reference to our shared history, weaponized and dressed up as teacher concern. People change, I said quietly. They do. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. Though sometimes they just retreat into themselves when they're hurt. Build walls to keep people out. Was she talking about me or herself? Because the Sophia I remembered had been vulnerable too, once upon a time. She used to cry during sad movies and panic before big tests and tell me her deepest fears during our sleepovers. The memoir project, she continued, I think it could be really healing for you. A chance to process some difficult experiences, maybe gain some closure. Closure. Like writing about my social exile for her entertainment would somehow fix what she'd broken. What if I write about something else? I asked. Something more recent. Her smile turned sharp. Oh, but our childhood experiences are so much more formative, don't you think? The friendships we make and lose during those crucial years shape everything that comes after. She tilted her head. I'm sure you have plenty of material to work with. The threat was crystal clear. Write about our friendship, about my humiliation, about how pathetically I'd handled being abandoned, or she'd find ways to make my life even more miserable. I'll think about it, I said, backing toward the door. I'm sure you will. Oh, and Marcus. The rough drafts are due Monday. I'm planning to do one-on-one conferences with each student to help you dig deeper into the emotional truth of your stories. One-on-one conferences. Just me, her, and whatever devastating memories she wanted to excavate in private. I made it to the parking lot before my hands started shaking. Sitting in my car, I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over my mom's contact. I could tell her I was sick. I could transfer schools. I could. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, looking forward to reading your memoir piece. Remember, the most painful stories often make the most powerful art. Don't hold back. Smiling face with smiling eyes, Ms. R. That emoji made my stomach turn. The casual cruelty of it, the fake friendliness masking something so much darker. As I drove home, one thought kept circling through my mind. Sophia wasn't just trying to humiliate me anymore. She was trying to force me back into the broken, desperate kid I'd been in middle school. And the terrifying part was, it was starting to work. That night, I sat at my desk until 3 a.m., staring at a blank document titled, Memoir Draft, due Monday. The cursor blinked mockingly while my brain cycled through every possible topic that wouldn't give Sophia more ammunition to destroy me with. I could write about learning to drive. Safe, boring, impossible to weaponize. But then I imagined her disappointed smile, the way she'd tilt her head during our conference and say something like, this feels surface level, Marcus. I know you're capable of more emotional depth. What are you really afraid to say? I could write about my dad leaving. But that felt too close to the truth she already knew, the vulnerable secrets I'd shared during sleepovers when I thought she'd keep them safe forever. By Friday morning, I'd managed exactly one paragraph about starting high school, and even that felt pathetic. I dragged myself to AP English feeling like I was walking to my own funeral. Don't forget, Sophia announced cheerfully as we filed in, rough drafts are due Monday, and we'll begin conferences Tuesday. I've already started looking forward to reading your authentic stories. The word authentic hit like a slap. Everything about this situation was the opposite of authentic, a former friend using her position of power to psychologically torment me under the guise of education. Jamie, excellent work on your analysis yesterday, she continued, walking between the desks. Sarah, I loved your insight about unreliable narrators. And Marcus. She paused beside my desk, and I felt heat radiating from her presence. I'm especially excited about your memoir piece. I have a feeling it's going to be very revealing. Heat crept up my neck as several classmates glanced over curiously. The way she'd said revealing made it sound like she already knew what I was going to write, like she was daring me to disappoint her. During lunch, I found myself sitting alone in the library, desperately Googling how to transfer classes mid-semester when someone slid into the chair across from me. Bethany. Because apparently my day wasn't terrible enough already. You look like death, she said, unwrapping a granola bar. Thanks. Really needed that today. I'm serious though. What's going on with you and Rodriguez? The whole class can see it's getting weird. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Like, weirder than just having history with a teacher. I closed my laptop screen. It's fine. It's not fine. She's targeting you. Bethany took a bite of her granola bar, chewing thoughtfully. You know what? I asked my sister about you guys yesterday. About what really happened in 8th grade. My blood turned to ice. What did she say? That's the thing. Jessica claims she doesn't remember much, but she got this weird look when I brought it up. Like she was hiding something. Bethany studied my face. She said Sophia changed that year. Became calculating. Started caring more about popularity than actual friendship. Why are you telling me this? Because whatever Rodriguez is doing to you now feels like the same thing. Calculated. She crumpled up her granola bar wrapper, staring at me intently. My sister also said Sophia used to know all your secrets. Like, everything. Your family stuff, your anxieties, embarrassing moments. The implication hung between us like a loaded gun. Sophia hadn't just abandoned me, she'd weaponized every vulnerable thing I'd ever shared with her. That memoir assignment, Bethany continued quietly. You're not actually going to write about your friendship with her, are you? Because if you do, she'll have exactly what she wants. What do you mean? Think about it. She gets to read your private thoughts about how much she hurt you, probably gets to hear you read them out loud to the whole class, and she can grade you on how well you perform your own trauma. Bethany's eyes were sharp with understanding. It's the perfect trap. My hands started trembling. Because she was right. Sophia had engineered the perfect scenario. I'd either write something shallow and get punished academically, or I'd write something real and get eviscerated personally. So what do? I whispered. Bethany was quiet for a long moment, then slowly smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested she'd inherited more than just Jessica's memories, she'd inherited the same strategic mind that had made my middle school years a nightmare. You give her exactly what she wants, she said softly. But not how she expects it. That weekend, I sat in my room with Bethany's cryptic words echoing in my head, give her exactly what she wants, but not how she expects it. Easy for her to say, she wasn't the one who'd have to sit across from Sophia during a conference and watch her dissect every word like a sadistic literature professor. But something about Bethany's suggestion had planted a seed. What did Sophia actually want from this memoir assignment? The obvious answer was my humiliation, my pain laid out for her to examine and grade. She wanted me broken and vulnerable, probably still that desperate middle schooler who'd called her house 17 times the day she'd started ignoring me. But what if that wasn't the whole picture? I found myself remembering things I tried to forget, not just the abandonment, but the months leading up to it. How Sophia had started getting angry when other people paid attention to me in class. The way she'd rolled her eyes when I'd gotten excited about making JV soccer. How she'd forgotten to invite me to her birthday party but made sure I saw all the Instagram photos. Had she been jealous? It seemed impossible. Sophia had always been the confident one, the natural leader. But thinking back with 3 years of distance, I could see patterns I'd missed as a desperate 13-year-old. Maybe what she'd wanted then, and what she wanted now, wasn't just my destruction. Maybe she wanted proof that she still mattered to me. That our friendship, and her betrayal of it, had been the defining trauma of my adolescence. And maybe, just maybe, I could use that. Sunday night, I finally started writing. Not the safe, boring essay about learning to drive, and not the raw confession of pain she was expecting. Instead, I wrote about resilience. About discovering who I was after losing someone I thought was essential to my identity. The summer before freshman year, I realized that spending 3 years defining myself by someone else's absence was another form of giving them power over my life. The person who taught me about friendship also taught me about betrayal, but the more important lesson was learning that I could survive both. I wrote about building new friendships, about discovering interests Sophia had never cared about the strange relief of not having to perform for someone's approval anymore. I kept it truthful but distant, analytical rather than emotional. Most importantly, I made it clear that while our friendship had mattered once, it was ancient history now. The key was in what I didn't write. No desperate anger, no lingering hurt, no indication that she'd successfully burrowed back under my skin. Just the polite indifference of someone who'd moved on completely. Because if Sophia's game was psychological, if she needed to believe she still had power over me, then the cruelest thing I could do was prove she didn't matter anymore. Monday morning, I walked into AP English with my printed memoir tucked into my binder and something that might have been confidence straightening my shoulders. Sophia's eyes found mine immediately, her smile sharp with anticipation. "Rough drafts on my desk, please," she announced. "I'll be reading through these tonight to prepare for our conferences tomorrow." I placed my pages in a stack with everyone else's, watching Sophia's fingers drum against her desk. She was excited. She thought she was about to feast on my emotional destruction. Instead, she was about to discover that the scared middle schooler she'd been tormenting no longer existed. At least, I hoped he didn't. The next morning, I walked into AP English to find the desks rearranged again. This time, Sophia had created a conference corner in the back, 2 chairs facing each other with a small table between them. Intimate. Private. Perfect for whatever psychological dissection she had planned. "Good morning, class," she said, but her eyes were locked on me. "I spent last night reading your memoir drafts, and I have to say, some of you really surprised me." Her tone was different today. Sharper. Like she'd bitten into an apple expecting sweetness and found something bitter instead. "We'll continue with our regular lesson plan while I conduct conferences," she announced. "I'll call you back one at a time." 20 minutes into class, while everyone else worked on analyzing symbolism in their current reading, Sophia's voice cut through the quiet. "Marcus. Let's start with you." Every head in the room turned to watch me gather my things and walk to the back corner. I could feel their curious stares, probably wondering what I'd done to earn the first spot. If only they knew. I settled into the chair across from Sophia, my memoir pages spread on the small table between us like evidence at a crime scene. She studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read, frustrated, maybe, or confused. "This was unexpected," she said finally, tapping my pages with one manicured finger. "Thank you. I wouldn't call it a compliment." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "When I assign personal memoir pieces, Marcus, I expect actual personal reflection. This reads like a psychology textbook." Heat flashed through me. "You said you wanted us to examine formative experiences. That's what I did. You examined them from a distance. Like they happened to someone else." Her voice was carefully controlled, but I caught the edge underneath. "Where's the emotional truth? The vulnerability that leads to authentic writing?" There was that word again. Authentic. As if anything about this situation was authentic. "Maybe that emotional distance is authentic to who I am now," I said quietly. Maybe the real growth was learning not to let past experiences define me. Something flickered across her face, anger, disappointment, something darker. She'd wanted me bleeding on the page, and I'd given her clinical analysis instead. "Let's try a different approach." She pulled out a red pen, clicking it like a weapon. "Tell me about the friendship you reference here. This person who taught you about betrayal. What actually happened?" My mouth went dry. She was abandoning the pretense entirely now, dropping the professional mask to dig directly into our shared history. "I think the essay speaks for itself," I managed. "Does it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like someone who's still very much affected by that relationship, trying desperately to convince themselves they're not." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I remember a boy who used to wear his heart on his sleeve. Who trusted completely, loved fiercely. Where did that person go?" The question hit like a physical blow. Because she was right, in a way. That boy had died somewhere between her first ignored text and my 17th unanswered phone call. I'd killed him myself, piece by piece, until someone harder remained. "Maybe he learned better," I said. "Or maybe he just learned to lie to himself." Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "This essay is dishonest, Marcus. You're hiding behind pretty words and psychological jargon to avoid dealing with real pain. And what if I am?" The words came out harder than I'd intended. What if some pain isn't meant to be performed for other people's entertainment? The accusation hung between us like smoke. For a moment, Sophia's professional facade cracked completely, and I saw something raw underneath. Guilt? Regret? Or just anger at being called out? "Your grade depends on authentic reflection," she said finally, her voice ice cold. "I suggest you reconsider your approach." She was threatening me. Directly, openly threatening my grade unless I bled for her entertainment. But as I walked back to my desk, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Sophia had just shown me her hand. And now I finally knew how to play mine. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a decision crystallizing in my mind. Sophia had made a critical mistake during our conference. She'd dropped the professional mask completely. She'd threatened my grade unless I gave her the emotional breakdown she wanted, and she'd done it in a way that felt distinctly personal rather than educational. More importantly, she texted my personal phone. Multiple times. From her own number, not through official school channels. I scrolled back through the messages she'd sent over the past few weeks, screenshotting each one. Asterisk, hope you're working hard on that Julius Caesar project. Asterisk asterisk, looking forward to reading your memoir piece. Don't hold back. Asterisk asterisk, remember, the most painful stories often make the most powerful art. Asterisk. Taken individually, they might seem like an enthusiastic teacher reaching out. But together, especially combined with her behavior in class, they painted a picture of something much more problematic. Harassment disguised as mentorship. A teacher using intimate knowledge of a student's personal history to manipulate their academic performance. My phone buzzed with a new message, asterisk, I hope you'll reconsider your memoir approach. I know you have deeper stories to tell. The grade you receive will reflect your willingness to be truly honest. Ms. Art asterisk. My hands actually shook as I read it. She was being explicit now, participate in your own psychological torture, or fail the class. And she was stupid enough to put it in writing. I took a screenshot, then opened my laptop and started typing a different kind of document. Not a memoir this time, but a detailed timeline. Every incident, every loaded comment, every strategic humiliation, dated and documented with clinical precision. The rearranged seating charts that always put me in her direct line of sight. The essay topics that felt surgically designed to trigger me. The presentation disaster where she'd forced me to analyze betrayal while she watched like a scientist studying her test subject. But I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed witnesses, documentation, proof that this was a pattern and not just a personality conflict. The next morning, I arrived at school early and made a beeline for the guidance office. Mrs. Patterson had been my counselor since freshman year. She'd helped me navigate the social anxiety that had followed me from middle school, and she knew some of the history without knowing all the details. Marcus, she said, looking up from her computer with a smile. You're here early. Everything okay? I need to ask you about something. Hypothetically. I sat down across from her desk, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. If a teacher was using personal information about a student's past to make them uncomfortable in class, what would that be called? Her smile faded. That would be highly inappropriate. Why? Is something happening? I pulled out my phone, showing her the most recent text. My AP English teacher has been messaging me directly. And we have history. From before high school. Mrs. Patterson frowned as she read the message. Teachers aren't supposed to contact students on personal numbers unless it's an emergency. And this language about grades reflecting honesty. She looked up at me sharply. Marcus, I need you to tell me exactly what's been going on. So I did. Not everything. I couldn't bring myself to explain the full scope of my friendship with Sophia, or how completely she destroyed my social life in middle school. But I told her about the targeted questions, the impossible essay topics, the way I felt singled out and manipulated in class. Have you documented any of this? Mrs. Patterson asked when I finished. I showed her my timeline, the screenshots, the pattern I'd mapped out over the past month. Her expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. This is concerning, she said finally. Very concerning. I'm going to need to discuss this with the administration. Will you have to tell her it was me who reported it? Not initially. We can frame it as a routine classroom observation, especially if other students have noticed the unusual dynamic. She leaned forward. But Marcus, if this escalates to a formal investigation, you'll need to be prepared to speak up officially. The thought terrified me, but something else was stronger than the fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control back. Sophia had been so focused on her psychological games that she'd forgotten the most basic rule of warfare, don't leave evidence. There's something else, I said quietly. I think she's going to keep pushing until she gets the reaction she wants. And I'm worried about what happens if I don't give it to her. Mrs. Patterson nodded grimly. Then we need to make sure you're protected before that happens. As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since walking into AP English that first day, hope. Sophia thought she held all the cards, but she'd been playing her hand too obviously. And now it was time for her to discover that the scared middle schooler she'd been tormenting had learned a few things about strategy himself. I thought reporting Sophia would make me feel safer, but instead it made everything worse. Mrs. Patterson had promised they'd handle things discreetly, but apparently Sophia had radar for administrative interference. The next day in AP English, her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I have exciting news, she announced to the class. I've decided to make some adjustments to our memoir project. Instead of individual conferences, we're going to workshop these pieces together as a class. My blood turned to ice. Public workshops meant reading excerpts aloud, meant peer feedback, meant 28 pairs of eyes watching as Sophia dissected my work in front of everyone. We'll start tomorrow with volunteers, she continued, her gaze sliding over me like a predator selecting prey. Though I may call on some of you if we don't get enough brave souls to share. After class, I tried to escape quickly, but her voice stopped me at the door. Marcus? I'd like to see you for a moment. The classroom emptied around us until it was just me, her, and the suffocating weight of whatever she was about to unleash. She waited until the last student was gone before speaking. I had an interesting conversation with Mrs. Patterson yesterday, she said, settling behind her desk like a judge taking the bench. Apparently there are some concerns about my teaching methods. My mouth went dry. So much for handling things discreetly. I can't imagine where those concerns might be coming from, she continued, tilting her head with mock confusion. Unless someone has been misinterpreting my enthusiastic teaching style as something more personal. The word personal dripped with meaning. She knew. She knew I'd reported her, and now she was going to make me pay for it. The thing about complaints to administration, Sophia said, standing and walking around her desk to perch on the edge, is that they require evidence. Proof of wrongdoing. And from where I'm sitting, I've been nothing but supportive of a struggling student. Struggling student. The words came out strangled. Well, yes. Your grades speak for themselves. The anxiety during presentations, the inability to engage meaningfully with assignment topics, the defensive behavior during conferences. She shrugged. It paints a picture of someone who might be looking for external blame for internal struggles. She was rewriting history in real time, transforming her systematic harassment into documentation of my academic failures. And the worst part was, she wasn't entirely wrong. My grades had suffered, I was anxious during presentations, I had been defensive. You know what I think, she continued, her voice dropping to that familiar concerned teacher tone that made my skin crawl. I think you're still that scared little boy from 8th grade. Still looking for someone to blame for why making friends is hard, why trusting people feels impossible. Heat flashed through me. You know exactly why. Why what? She interrupted sharply. Why you couldn't handle a normal friendship transition. Why you made something natural and age-appropriate feel like a personal attack. The revisionist history hit like a slap. In her version, she hadn't abandoned me cruelly, I'd simply failed to handle growing apart like a mature person. I tried to be gentle back then, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. But you made it so difficult. The constant calls, following me around school, making our other friends uncomfortable. She shook her head sadly. I probably should have been more direct, but I was 13. I didn't know how to handle someone who was so intense. My vision blurred around the edges. She was rewriting everything, my pain, my confusion, my desperate attempts to understand what I'd done wrong. Making it all sound pathological instead of human. And now here we are again, she said softly. You're struggling in my class, and instead of looking inward, you're creating elaborate narratives about persecution. She stood, smoothing her skirt. It's actually quite sad. I stood frozen, watching her pack up her papers with casual efficiency. She just annihilated every legitimate grievance I had and made me sound like a delusional stalker in the process. Oh, and Marcus, she called as I finally stumbled toward the door. I'll be very interested to hear your memoir piece tomorrow. I have a feeling it will be quite revealing about your current state of mind. The threat was crystal clear. Read your trauma aloud for the class to dissect, or watch me destroy your credibility entirely. As I walked to my car on shaking legs, one thing became painfully obvious, I'd seriously underestimated my opponent. That night, I sat in my car in the school parking lot at 11 p.m., staring at the dark windows of the English wing. I'd driven here without really deciding to, my hands on autopilot while my brain spiraled through every possible scenario for tomorrow's workshop. I could skip class. But Sophia would probably use my absence as evidence of my instability when administration asked follow-up questions. I could read my sanitized memoir and watch her tear it apart in front of everyone. Or I could give her what she wanted, bleed all over the page about our friendship, and let her feast on my humiliation while 28 classmates watched. Every option felt like a different flavor of defeat. My phone buzzed. Another text from her, really hoping you'll share tomorrow. I think it could be therapeutic for you to finally process these old wounds. Sometimes we need a push to grow. Blue heart, The heart emoji made my stomach turn. Even her fake compassion felt like a weapon. I was about to drive home when I noticed another car pulling into the lot. A familiar silver Honda that made my blood freeze, Bethany's car. She parked a few spaces away and got out, walking over to tap on my passenger window. Kind of late for a school parking lot breakdown, she said as she slid into the seat beside me. How did you find my friend's app? I added myself when we were working on the Caesar project. She studied my face in the dim glow of the streetlight. You look like someone who's planning something stupid. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Define stupid. Reading whatever trauma dump memoir you rewrote after she got to you yesterday. Bethany's eyes were sharp. Because that's what happened, right? She found out you reported her and now she's escalating. I stared at her. How do you know about? Please. My sister's been texting me updates about the drama between Marcus and Ms. Rodriguez all week. Apparently the whole school's talking about how she's been targeting you. Bethany pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. Want to know what people are saying? Before I could answer, she started reading. Jessica says it's obvious something personal is going on. Tyler from your class thinks she has it out for you. Emma noticed she rearranged the seating chart just to put you in the hot seat. My heart hammered against my ribs. If other students were noticing, maybe I wasn't as powerless as Sophia wanted me to believe. There's something else, Bethany continued. I did some digging about Ms. Rodriguez. Turns out this is her first teaching job, and she's only on a temporary contract. What does that mean? It means she needs this semester to go perfectly if she wants them to hire her permanently. No complaints, no problems, no negative attention from administration. Bethany's smile turned predatory. She's actually way more vulnerable than she's pretending to be. The information hit like a lightning bolt. Sophia wasn't some untouchable authority figure, she was a new teacher walking a tightrope, just as desperate to survive this semester as I was. But here's the thing, Bethany said, her voice dropping. If you implode tomorrow, if you give her that emotional breakdown she's pushing for, it plays right into her narrative. Unstable student has mental health crisis, concerned teacher tried to help. So what do I do? Bethany was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark school building. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a cold calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of Sophia at her worst. You give a performance, she said. But not the one she's expecting. The next morning, I walked into AP English with Bethany's words echoing in my head. You give a performance, but not the one she's expecting. She'd spent an hour in that parking lot walking me through her plan, and while it terrified me, it was the only option that didn't end with my complete destruction. Sophia was already at her desk, practically vibrating with anticipation. She'd arranged the chairs in a circle again, creating her amphitheater of psychological warfare. Good morning, everyone, she said as we settled in. I'm so excited about our memoir workshop today. There's nothing quite like authentic storytelling to bring a class together. My hands were steady as I pulled out my pages, not the clinical analysis I'd written before, and not the trauma dump rewrite she was expecting. This was something else entirely. Something Bethany had helped me craft in that parking lot, sentence by calculated sentence. Now, who'd like to volunteer to share first? Sophia's eyes swept the room, lingering on me with obvious expectation. Silence stretched for exactly the right amount of time before I raised my hand. I'll go, I said quietly. Sophia's smile could have powered the entire school. Wonderful, Marcus. Please, take the center. I stood and moved to the middle of the circle, my memoir pages in hand. 28 pairs of eyes focused on me, along with Sophia's predatory stare. This was her moment of triumph. She thought she was about to watch me crumble. Instead, I was about to give the performance of my life. My memoir is called The Art of Letting Go, I began, my voice deliberately soft so everyone had to lean in to hear. It's about learning that some people come into your life not to stay, but to teach you something essential about yourself. Sophia's expression flickered slightly. This opening wasn't quite what she'd expected. When I was 13, I had a friendship that meant everything to me, I continued, letting my voice carry just enough emotion to sound authentic. This person knew all my secrets, my fears, my dreams. We promised we'd be friends forever. Now Sophia was leaning forward, thinking she was about to get her feast of pain. But that friendship taught me something crucial. The people who know us best are also the ones capable of hurting us most deeply. Not through malice, necessarily, but through their own limitations. I paused, letting my gaze drift across my classmates' faces, engaged, sympathetic, completely invested in the story. This person wasn't cruel, I said, the lie sliding off my tongue like silk. They were just young. Scared of being seen as immature for maintaining certain friendships. Worried about their image, their social status. And in trying to protect themselves, they made choices that caused pain they probably never intended. Sophia's face had gone very still. This wasn't the narrative of victimization she'd been banking on. For a long time, I was angry about how that friendship ended, I continued. I felt abandoned, betrayed, confused. But eventually I realized that holding on to that anger was just giving someone else power over my happiness. Several classmates were nodding along, completely absorbed. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Sophia's hands clenched in her lap. The real gift that friendship gave me wasn't the good times, it was learning resilience. Learning that I could survive disappointment and come out stronger. Learning that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone else's behavior, it's about freeing yourself from carrying their choices. I looked directly at Sophia now, letting sincerity ring in my voice. So wherever that person is now, I hope they've learned to make better choices. I hope they've grown past whatever insecurities drove them to hurt others. Because honestly, I'm grateful for everything they taught me, even if they taught it in the hardest way possible. The classroom was dead silent. My classmates looked moved, inspired even. But Sophia looked like she'd been slapped. Because I'd just rewritten our entire history again, not as her victim, but as someone who transcended her completely. Questions or feedback for Marcus? Sophia asked, her voice strained but professional. Hands shot up around the circle. That was beautiful. So mature of you to find forgiveness. I loved how you turned pain into growth. Sophia had no choice but to facilitate the discussion, watching helplessly as student after student praised my emotional maturity and inspiring perspective. The very qualities she'd been trying to convince everyone I lacked. Thank you all for that feedback, I said, settling back into my seat. It feels good to finally put that chapter to rest. The key phrase, finally put that chapter to rest hung in the air like a declaration of independence. I wasn't the broken middle schooler she remembered. I wasn't even the anxious student she'd been tormenting for weeks. I was someone who'd grown beyond her entirely. Sophia's face had gone pale. That was very nice, Marcus. Though perhaps a bit surface level in terms of exploring genuine emotional complexity. But her criticism fell flat. The entire class had just witnessed my composure, my eloquence, my ability to transform pain into wisdom. Her attempts to tear me down now just made her look petty. The rest of the workshop passed in a blur of other students sharing their stories while Sophia sat rigid in her chair, the wind completely knocked out of her sails. Every few minutes, I caught her staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, frustration mixed with something that might have been respect. When the bell rang, she didn't ask me to stay behind. For the first time in weeks, I walked out of her classroom without feeling like I'd been psychologically dissected. At lunch, Bethany found me in the library, grinning like she'd won the lottery. How did it go? She whispered. See for yourself, I said, showing her my phone. 3 classmates had already texted me about how powerful my memoir was. 2 more had asked if I was planning to submit it to the school literary magazine. Genius, Bethany breathed. You completely flipped the script. She was right. By publicly forgiving Sophia, whether she deserved it or not, I reclaimed the narrative entirely. I was no longer the victim in our story, I was the survivor who'd grown beyond needing her acknowledgement or apology. Over the next few weeks, Sophia's behavior changed dramatically. The loaded questions stopped. The strategic seating arrangements disappeared. Her grading became scrupulously fair, almost defensive in its objectivity. She treated me like any other student, politely, professionally, distantly. Because that's all I was now, just another student. Not a former best friend to manipulate, not a victim to torment, not a secret she could hold over someone's head. The power she'd wielded had come from my caring what she thought, and I publicly demonstrated that I didn't anymore. Mrs. Patterson called me in a few days later to follow up on my complaint. I have to say, Marcus, your teacher speaks very highly of you now, she said, consulting her notes. She mentioned you gave an exceptional presentation recently. I guess she finally saw who I really am, I replied truthfully. On the last day of the semester, Sophia handed back our final essays with written comments. Mine simply said, excellent work this semester. You've shown real growth as both a writer and a person. Best wishes for your future endeavors. No personal references. No hidden meanings. Just the professional courtesy any good student would receive. As I packed up my things after that final class, I realized something profound. The scared 13-year-old who'd been desperate for Sophia's friendship was truly gone. In his place stood someone who understood that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's indifference. Walking out of AP English for the last time, I finally felt free.